I didn't know my life was about to split into a before and an after because of a phone call in the middle of a normal workday. Not a call from my fiancé, not a call from a hospital, a call from a woman who said very calmly at first, "Hi, I'm Marissa. I'm Frederick's wife." I remember staring at my computer screen like the words on it were in a language I couldn't read anymore. The office around me kept moving, keyboards clicking, someone laughing near the break room, while my body went cold and heavy at the same time. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing air into my lungs. "You have the wrong number. Frederick is my fiancé. His wife died years ago." There was a pause on the line, not silence, breathing, like she was holding herself together with both hands. "Describe him," she whispered. I did. Height, hair, the small scar near his chin, the way he always said, "Hey, love," like it was a habit. I heard her inhale, sharp and broken, and then she started crying. "It's him," she said. "It's my husband." My fingers went numb around the phone. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. My coworkers looked over, but I couldn't explain anything. All I could do was grab my bag and walk. Too fast, like my legs were trying to outrun the truth. The drive home was a blur of red lights and shaking hands on the steering wheel. My throat kept tightening, like I was swallowing glass. When I opened our apartment door, the place smelled like his cologne and coffee. Safe, familiar, mine. Frederick was in his office, door half closed, voice low, on a call. I waited. Every second felt like a wire pulling tighter in my chest. When he finally stepped out, he smiled at me. Automatic, easy, until he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked. I held my phone up like evidence in court. "Your wife just called me." His color drained so fast it looked like someone turned off the lights behind his eyes. He didn't deny it. He just sat down hard on the couch, put his head in his hands, and said the sentence that ruined everything I thought I knew. "Her name is Marissa, and we have a daughter." My knees nearly gave out. "A daughter?" I repeated. "Frederick, what are you saying?" He looked up at me, eyes wet, voice shaking. "I can explain." And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. He'd been explaining everything for years, just not the truth. Before that call, my life looked normal. Not perfect, but steady in the way I'd always wanted. I'm Talia, 29, and I work in project coordination for a mid-sized tech company in downtown Portland. I'm the kind of woman who lives by calendars and color-coded reminders. I like paying my bills early. I like knowing where my keys are. I like relationships that feel like a warm hoodie, familiar, safe, mine. That's why Frederick felt like fate when I met him. It was 4 years ago, at a coffee shop near my office, one of those places with reclaimed wood tables and music that's always just a little too loud. I was half awake, ordering my usual latte, when the guy in front of me turned around and said, "Let me get that." I laughed because I thought he was joking. Men didn't do that anymore, but he did. He paid, then stood there like he didn't know what to do with himself after the brave act was done. "Sorry," he said quickly. "That probably came off weird." "It came off caffeinated," I teased, and he smiled like someone had finally loosened a knot in his chest. We talked while we waited. He told me he'd moved from Sacramento about 6 months earlier for work. Digital marketing, bigger opportunities, fresh start. He didn't flirt aggressively. He didn't lean too close. He just listened. Like every sentence I said mattered. And then he told me the story that made my heart soften in a way that feels humiliating now. He said he was a widower. He said his wife, he called her Heidi, had died in a car accident 3 years before we met. He didn't oversell it. He didn't give dramatic details. He just said it like it was a scar he didn't touch unless he had to. When he spoke about her, his voice would go quieter, and his eyes would drop somewhere over my shoulder, like he was watching something only he could see. "I thought we'd have kids," he said once, stirring his coffee like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. "We never got the chance." I remember my throat tightening. I remember reaching across the table and covering his hand with mine. Gentle, careful, like grief could bruise if I pressed too hard. That was the version of Frederick I fell in love with. A man who'd been through something awful and still showed up with flowers on Fridays. A man who remembered I hated cilantro. A man who asked how my meeting went and actually waited for the answer. 8 months in, we started talking about moving in together. He told me he was still renting a small place because buying a house felt impossible after losing Heidi. He said his apartment held too many memories and he wanted a clean start with me. So we found our place together. 2 bedrooms in the Pearl District. Bright windows, a tiny balcony, enough space for both our lives. He turned the second bedroom into an office almost immediately. Desk, monitor, a little ring light. The door was often closed. Clients, he'd say, East Coast schedules. And because I trusted him, and because I didn't want to be the kind of woman who polices a man's work, I never made a big deal out of it. There were other little things too, the kind of details you file away without naming. Frederick had surprisingly few personal belongings. When we moved, he brought almost nothing. No photo albums, no keepsakes, barely any old clothes. I donated most of it, he said. It hurt to look at. He also never wanted me to meet coworkers, never wanted me to drop by his office. If I suggested drinks with colleagues, he'd smile and redirect. I like keeping work separate, he'd say, kissing my forehead like that solved it. He didn't use social media much either. Said it depressed him. Said it reminded him of what he lost. His profiles existed, but they were empty, like placeholders. And the biggest thing, I never met his family. He said he'd lost touch with them after Heidi died. He didn't want a big wedding someday, just close friends. Simple, quiet. I believed him, because I was proud of how mature we were. I told myself love didn't need noise. Then, on our second anniversary, he proposed at the same coffee shop, a vintage-style ring. He said it reminded him of his grandmother. I cried, not because it was flashy, but because it felt like he was choosing life again, with me. And for a while, I let myself live in that story. A story where his sadness made him gentle, where his privacy meant depth, where my trust was a strength. I didn't realize I was building a future on top of a lie so old and polished, it didn't even squeak when he walked on it. If I'm honest with myself now, the cracks didn't appear the day Marissa called. They had been there all along. I just painted over them with love. Frederick traveled often. That was normal in tech, he said. Conferences, client meetings, strategy sessions, sometimes 2 or 3 days at a time. I'll call you every night, he promised. And he did. That's the thing that still confuses me. He wasn't sloppy. He wasn't distant. He would FaceTime me from hotel rooms, complain about airline food, show me boring conference badges. But looking back, I realized something. The backgrounds were always generic. Beige walls, closed curtains, neutral art. I never saw anything personal in those rooms. Never saw luggage either. I never asked why. At home, his office door stayed closed more than I realized at the time. He said he needed privacy for client calls. NDAs. Sensitive information. I respected that. I'd knock lightly if I needed something. Once, about a year into living together, I opened the door without thinking because I'd forgotten my charger. He flinched. Not dramatically, just a quick shift, like someone who almost dropped something fragile. I'm on a call, he said sharply. There was no voice on the other end that I could hear. He muted his headset quickly and smiled. Sorry, big account. I apologized. I was the one who felt guilty. There were financial things too. Frederick always seemed comfortable. Not flashy, but never stressed. Expensive dinners, weekend trips, thoughtful gifts. He paid for most of our dates without hesitation. I budget carefully, he'd say if I teased him about spoiling me. We agreed to split rent proportionally since he claimed he earned a little more than I did. He handled the utilities in his name. I handled groceries and internet. It felt fair. But I never saw detailed bank statements, never saw pay stubs. I didn't need to, I told myself. We weren't married yet. He kept saying he wanted to delay the wedding until we were financially solid. I don't want to rush, he'd say. After everything I lost, I want this to be stable. It sounded responsible. Now it sounds like stalling. There were moments that pricked at me, small and sharp. Like the time I suggested we visit Sacramento to see his old friends. He stiffened. I'd rather not, he said. Too many memories. Or when I asked why there were no photos of him and Heidi anywhere. I can't look at them, he said quietly. That answer shut me up every time. Grief is a powerful shield. And then there was the loneliness in his life. He had 2 business partners, Jake and Ryan, whom I met once at a restaurant. Polite, vague, professional. But that was it. No childhood best friend. No cousin dropping by. No coworker happy hour. He blamed it on being new to Portland, on working too much, on still adjusting after loss. And I believed him because I wanted to believe I was his fresh start. The night before Marissa called, he had been particularly affectionate. We had ordered Thai food and watched a movie. He held my hand the whole time. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, he whispered as we went to bed. I smiled in the dark, feeling chosen. Now I understand something chilling. When someone is living multiple lives, they overcompensate in each one. They perform devotion. They rehearse sincerity. 3 weeks before everything collapsed, I had noticed he was guarding his phone more carefully. Face down on the table, always within reach. When I joked about it, he laughed. Corporate paranoia, he said, and kissed me. The morning Marissa called, he'd left early for a client breakfast. I kissed him goodbye like I always did. I didn't know he was kissing me with the same mouth he used to kiss another woman goodbye in another house. I didn't know there was a little girl somewhere calling him Dad. And I definitely didn't know that while I was planning seating charts for our wedding, he was balancing stories like a tightrope walker who had done it so many times he forgot falling was possible. The seeds were there, but I watered them with trust. And trust, in the wrong hands, becomes fertilizer for deception. When Frederick said, "Her name is Marissa, and we have a daughter," the room felt like it tilted slightly to the left. I gripped the back of the dining chair to steady myself. "A daughter?" I repeated, because my brain refused to move forward until it understood that word. "You have a child?" He nodded without looking at me. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "She's 6, he said. "Her name is Sophie." 6. That meant he had been a father the entire time I knew him. "Say it clearly," I whispered. "Are you married?" "Yes." The word dropped between us like glass. I laughed once. It wasn't humor. It was shock. "But you're a widower," I said flatly. "Your wife died. Car accident. Heidi." He swallowed. "Heidi isn't real." I felt my stomach twist so violently I had to sit down. "You invented a dead wife?" He closed his eyes. I didn't know how to explain things when we met. I was unhappy. I didn't think it would go this far. "Go this far?" My voice rose before I could control it. "You proposed to me, Frederick." He looked up at that. "I love you." The audacity of that sentence nearly made me dizzy. "You love me?" I stood up again, pacing. "You live in this apartment with me. You sleep in my bed. You planned a wedding with me. And you go home to your wife and daughter in between." He flinched. "I don't go home in between," he said quickly. "It's structured." "Structured?" I stared at him. "Like a calendar?" He rubbed his face. "Marissa and I live in Beaverton. I stay there certain nights. Other nights I stay here. I tell her I'm working late or traveling. I tell you I'm on business trips when I'm home with them." My chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. "How long?" I asked. "Almost 4 years. Almost our entire relationship." The betrayal wasn't sharp anymore. It was suffocating. Thick. Everywhere. "Does she know about me?" He shook his head. "Not until today." I thought about that woman's voice on the phone. The way it cracked when I described him. "She found my number in your phone," I said slowly. He nodded. "She went through it while I was in the shower." I let out a long breath, trying to anchor myself. "And Sophie?" I whispered. "Your daughter. Does she know you're... what? Engaged to someone else?" His jaw tightened. "No, of course not." The word "of course" made something in me snap. "You're lying to a child," I said. "Your own child." He stood up then, pacing now the way I had been. "I was going to fix it," he said. "I just needed time." "Time to what?" I demanded. "To divorce her? To leave your daughter? To decide which woman to keep?" He ran both hands through his hair. "I plan to divorce Marissa eventually, I swear. I just didn't know how to handle custody. I didn't want to lose Sophie." "So instead," I said quietly, "you decided to live 2 lives." He stepped closer to me. "I didn't plan for it to get serious with you." The words landed like a slap. "So I was supposed to be temporary?" My voice trembled despite myself. "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant. I fell in love with you. I didn't expect that." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this broken man in front of me with the one who brought me flowers every Friday. "Did you ever feel guilty?" I asked. "Yes," he whispered. "When?" "All the time." "Not enough," I said. He sank back onto the couch. "I'll file for divorce," he said urgently. "Tomorrow. We can fix this. We can start over. I'll tell her everything." The calmness that came over me then was almost frightening. "You think the problem is paperwork," I said. He looked confused. "The problem is not that you're legally married," I continued. "The problem is that you lied about who you are. You invented a dead woman. You let me mourn someone who never existed." His shoulders slumped. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth once we were serious," he said. "You had 4 years." Silence stretched between us. "And the ring?" I asked finally, glancing down at my hand. "Was that real at least?" "Yes," he said quickly. "I bought it with my own money." I almost laughed again, as if that mattered. I walked into our bedroom and pulled out a small overnight bag. My movements felt mechanical. "What are you doing?" he asked, following me. "I need space." "Talia, please." His voice broke. "Don't leave." I turned around slowly. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. I zipped the bag shut. "You didn't lose your wife in a car accident," I said quietly. "You lost your integrity somewhere along the way." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "I'm going to my sister's," I said. "Talia!" "Don't!" I slipped the ring off my finger and placed it on the dresser. "I can't marry a stranger," I said. And for the first time since I met him, I saw fear in Frederick's eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control. I walked out of that apartment with my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Behind me, he called my name. But I didn't turn around, because something inside me had already broken, and it wasn't something he could repair with promises. My sister Heidi opened the door before I even knocked twice. She took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. "Come here," she said softly. The second I stepped into her apartment, the composure I'd been holding together with sheer willpower dissolved. My bag slipped from my shoulder, my throat closed, and then I was crying into her sweater like I was 12 years old again. "What happened?" she asked, guiding me to the couch. I tried to say it cleanly, calmly, like an adult explaining a bad business deal. "He's married." The words still sounded unreal. Heidi blinked. "Married? As in currently?" "Yes," my voice cracked. "And he has a 6-year-old daughter." Her entire posture changed. Her arms tightened around me. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." I told her everything. The phone call, the confession, the fake dead wife, the double life, the way he said it was structured, like he was discussing calendar blocks instead of human beings. Heidi didn't interrupt. She didn't jump to conclusions. She just listened, which somehow made it hurt more. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. "He didn't just cheat," she said quietly. "He constructed an identity." That sentence stayed with me, because that's what it felt like. Not betrayal in a moment of weakness. A full architectural design. That first night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, memories replayed with new meaning. The hotel rooms on FaceTime. The closed office door. The way he sometimes seemed distracted on weekends. I kept whispering to myself in the dark, how did I not see it? Around 3 a.m., Heidi knocked gently on the guest room door. "You awake?" "Yes." She came in and sat at the edge of the bed. "You trusted the man you were engaged to," she said. "That's not stupidity. That's normal." "But the signs—" "Red flags only look red in hindsight," she said firmly. "When you're in it, they look beige." I almost laughed despite everything. The next morning, my phone was full of messages from Frederick. Missed calls, voicemails, long texts. "Please come home. I'll fix it. I'll file tomorrow. We can still have our life." I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question that felt heavier than any of his lies. If he divorces her, can I ever trust him? The answer came immediately. No. Because if someone can lie about the existence of a spouse and child, what line do they not cross? On the second day, guilt started creeping in. Not for him, for Marissa. I pictured her sitting somewhere, maybe at a kitchen table, replaying years of her own memories, wondering how much of her marriage was real. I thought about their daughter, Sophie, 6 years old enough to remember, old enough to be confused. The third day, I called Marissa back. My hand shook dialing her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hello? It's Talia." There was a pause. Not hostile, just heavy. "Hi. Can we meet?" I asked. We chose a neutral coffee shop in Beaverton. When I saw her in person for the first time, something inside me twisted. She looked normal, not intimidating, not cruel, just tired. "You're younger than I imagined," she said softly. "You're not what I expected either." We both gave a sad half smile at that. She told me she had suspected something was off for months. The late nights, the guarded phone, the vague explanations. "He said he was working on a big project downtown," she said. "Said he needed quiet space." I swallowed. "That was our apartment." Her eyes glistened. "He told me you were a client," she whispered at one point. The nausea that hit me then was physical. "He said you were widowed?" she asked gently. "Yes." She closed her eyes. "He's still married to me," she said. 7 years. I felt something settle in my chest. Not calm, but clarity. This wasn't a messy triangle. This was a man running a performance across 2 households. "I'm not marrying him," I said firmly. Marissa nodded. "I don't think I can stay either." When we stood to leave, there was no hatred between us, just exhaustion. In the parking lot, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For both of us." That night, I went back to the apartment while Frederick was at work. I packed my things methodically. Clothes, laptop, books, small framed photos that now felt like props from a play. I left the ring on the kitchen counter. Under it, I placed a note. I can't build a future with someone who erased his present. I didn't wait for him to come home. I blocked his number before I even reached my car. Driving away, my chest hurt, but not in the panicked way it had 3 days earlier. This pain was cleaner, sharp, but honest. For the first time since that phone call, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And that felt like the first piece of myself I'd reclaimed. 2 months passed. I moved into a small studio in Southeast Portland. White walls, creaky floors, sunlight that hit the kitchen counter at exactly 4:15 p.m. every afternoon. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No closed office door, No second toothbrush. I didn't fully understand. I started sleeping again. Not perfectly, but enough. I blocked Frederick everywhere. Phone, email, social media. I changed passwords, updated security questions, deleted shared cloud folders. I thought that chapter was closing. I was wrong. One Tuesday afternoon, I got a LinkedIn message from someone named Alyssa Grant. Her message was short. Hi, Talia. I know this is strange, but I believe we might have something in common. It involves Frederick. I think you need to hear this. My stomach tightened instantly. I almost ignored it. But something in the phrasing, measured, not hysterical, made me respond. We met at a cafe in Northeast Portland. She was around my age, polished, calm in a way that suggested she had rehearsed this conversation. I thought he was divorced, she said within 5 minutes of sitting down. The air left my lungs. Excuse me? He told me his ex-wife lived in California, she continued. Said the divorce had just finalized. How long were you together? 8 months. 8 months. My brain tried to calculate timelines. You mean during? I couldn't even finish the sentence. Yes, she said gently, while you were engaged. The room felt smaller. She showed me photos. Restaurants I recognized. The same hand on her lower back the way he used to touch me. The same promises in text messages. I want a family with you. I've never felt this understood before. You're my fresh start. I stared at the screen. The script hadn't even changed. Did you meet him through work? I asked. No, a dating app. The word hit me like cold water. Dating app. He said he was serious about settling down, Alyssa said. He talked about having kids soon. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. He had been actively searching. This wasn't overlap born from emotional confusion. It was systematic. We started comparing notes. His unavailable hours, his travel, his reluctance to introduce friends, the vague background, the minimal belongings. Then Alyssa said something that made my blood run cold. He asked me if I'd consider getting pregnant soon. I blinked. What? He said it would prove our commitment, that starting a family would anchor us. My chest tightened painfully. He told me he wanted to wait until after the wedding, I whispered. We stared at each other across the table. 3 women, 3 different timelines. 1 man. And his wife? Alyssa asked quietly. Marissa, I said, they're still married. Alyssa exhaled sharply. This is bigger than just cheating. We decided to look deeper. Over the next week, we did something that felt surreal, like we were investigating a stranger instead of someone we once loved. We searched public records, dating profiles, old usernames, archived accounts, and we found them. Multiple dating app profiles under slight variations of his name. Same photos, slightly adjusted stories. Widower, recently divorced, separated father. Different narratives tailored to different audiences. He wasn't improvising. He was managing parallel campaigns. Alyssa found 2 more women who had recently gone on dates with him. One, Lisa, had been ghosted after 3 dates. The other, Amanda, had been messaging him daily and was planning to meet him soon. We warned them both. Lisa said she'd been confused by how serious he seemed before disappearing. Amanda thanked us. She said she had been excited, hopeful. That word hurt. Hopeful. The more we uncovered, the more structured everything felt. Like he maintained spreadsheets in his head. Or maybe on his computer. And then something shifted from disturbing to dangerous. A week later, I ran into Jake, one of Frederick's business partners, at the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable the second he saw me. Talia, he said cautiously, can we talk? We stepped outside. Jake hesitated before speaking. Frederick was arrested 3 weeks ago. The world narrowed to a point. For what? Identity theft, fraud, multiple counts. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might faint. What are you talking about? Jake rubbed the back of his neck. He's been using people's information to open credit cards, loans. Some of the victims were women he dated. My hands started shaking. Victims, I repeated. Jake nodded grimly. The police contacted our firm. They're investigating whether he used client information too. The air felt thin. Jake handed me a business card. Detective Morrison, she said your name came up. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I called the number. Detective Morrison's voice was calm, professional. Yes, Ms. Talia, she said. We were hoping to speak with you. I went to the station that afternoon. Sitting across from her felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's story. She opened a file. Frederick used your social security number to apply for 3 credit cards, she said, and a personal loan. The words blurred. I what? He likely gathered your information while you lived together, she continued. Mail access, shared documents. My ears rang. He's been making minimum payments to avoid detection, but the balances are significant. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears, rage. Every dinner, every gift, every romantic weekend. Stolen. Funded by me. And Marissa? I asked weakly. She's also a victim. Of course she was. Detective Morrison explained the pattern. He would collect personal data slowly, open accounts under aliases, route statements to P.O. boxes, maintain just enough payment activity to avoid red flags. He kept detailed spreadsheets, she added, tracking victims and balances. Victims. I swallowed hard. He proposed to me, I said quietly. The detective's expression softened slightly. He was planning to add himself to your financial accounts after marriage, she said. We found search history. My breath caught painfully. Marriage wasn't just emotional access. It was financial expansion. A larger pool to siphon from. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the wall. For months, I had been grieving betrayal. Now I was facing something colder. Calculated. Predatory. Frederick hadn't just lied about love. He had built a system around deception. And I had been one line in a spreadsheet. The shock gave way to something steadier. Not panic. Resolve. I filed reports, froze my credit, submitted documentation. I turned over the engagement ring to the police as evidence. Watching it leave my hand felt strangely freeing. It had never meant what I thought it did. As the investigation expanded, more women were identified. More accounts uncovered. The scale of it kept growing. And with every new detail, one thing became clearer. The man I thought I loved didn't exist. He was a mask worn by someone who saw relationships as opportunity. And now that mask was cracking in a courtroom. For the first time since the phone call, I wasn't just reacting. I was participating in the exposure of the truth, and that truth was bigger than heartbreak. It was criminal. The darkest part wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the arrest. It wasn't even hearing the words identity theft attached to the man I almost married. It was the quiet. The night after Detective Morrison showed me the evidence, I sat alone in my studio apartment with all the lights off. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, because I didn't have the energy to move. The room felt unfamiliar, even though I'd lived there for weeks. My couch, my coffee table, my framed art, everything suddenly looked temporary, like props on a stage I didn't fully belong to anymore. I replayed our entire relationship in my head like surveillance footage. The Friday flowers, the anniversary proposal, the way he would brush hair away from my face when I was stressed. Every memory had to be reclassified. Not romantic, strategic. And that realization hurt more than the lies. Because if it was all strategy, then where did that leave me? Was I chosen? Or was I selected? I pulled my knees to my chest on the couch and whispered into the dark, was any of it real? The scariest part was that I didn't know. Detective Morrison had described spreadsheets. Spreadsheets. My name next to balances and dates and credit lines. I imagined him typing, updating columns after kissing me goodnight. The thought made my skin crawl. At some point around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. He's out on bail. My stomach dropped. Logically, I knew he wasn't coming for me. There was a restraining order in place as part of the conditions. His passport had been confiscated. But logic doesn't always calm the nervous system. I checked my door lock twice, then 3 times. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the hallway sounded amplified. Every passing car made my heart spike. The next day at work, I found myself staring at emails without reading them. Words slid past my eyes but didn't register. My coworker leaned over my desk. You okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. I didn't know how to explain that the person I loved had turned out to be a professional liar, that I was now part of a felony case, that my credit score had dropped 80 points overnight because of accounts I didn't open. The practical damage hit in waves. Calls from banks, forms to fill out, hours on hold with credit agencies. I felt stupid answering security questions about accounts that weren't mine. At one point, I sat on hold listening to tinny music and suddenly burst into tears, not because of the fraud, because I had trusted him enough to leave important documents in shared drawers. I trusted him enough to say yes, and that trust felt like something I had handed over voluntarily. One evening, Heidi came over with takeout and found me staring at the engagement ring box Detective Morrison had returned empty. You okay? She asked softly. I don't know who I was, I said. She sat beside me. You were in love. No, I shook my head. I was naive. Heidi's voice sharpened slightly. Stop! I looked at her. You didn't fall for a random stranger on the street, she said. You fell for someone who built a character specifically designed to be trustworthy. That word again. Built. Constructed. Designed? I keep wondering if there was a moment, I whispered. A moment where I could have caught it. Maybe, she said gently. But you weren't looking for a criminal. That night, I allowed myself to feel something deeper than anger. Grief. Not for him. For the future I thought I had. For the version of myself who believed in that future. I mourned the wedding dress fitting I'd imagined. The honeymoon conversations, the children's names we had once joked about. All of it had to be dismantled piece by piece. And somewhere in that dismantling, I felt hollow. What if I couldn't trust my judgment again? What if I chose wrong next time too? The darkest thought came quietly. What if I attract this kind of person? It lingered for days. I stopped going to the gym for a week, ignored texts from friends, let dishes pile up. Then one afternoon, I opened my laptop and saw a notification from the victim support group Detective Morrison had recommended. A meeting that night. I almost didn't go, but something inside me resisted staying frozen. So I went. I sat in a circle of strangers who had been lied to in different ways. Romantic scams, financial fraud, long-term deception. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook. I was engaged to someone who turned out to be married and running identity theft schemes, I said. No one gasped. No one judged. They just nodded. And for the first time since everything exploded, I didn't feel stupid. I felt human, vulnerable, but not defective. That was the beginning of something shifting. Not hope, not yet, but the realization that being deceived by a skilled manipulator doesn't make you weak. It means you were targeted. And that distinction mattered more than I expected. Still, the nights were long. Still, my chest tightened when I thought about testifying. Still, I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. This was the bottom. Not because I had lost him, but because I had lost the illusion. And illusions, once shattered, don't quietly disappear. They leave sharp edges behind. The shift didn't happen in a dramatic moment. It happened in a courtroom. I didn't plan to attend Frederick's arraignment hearing. Part of me wanted to stay far away from him, from that version of my life. But another part, quieter, steadier, needed to see it. Not him, the truth. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Bright lights, wooden benches, fluorescent stillness. When they brought Frederick in, wearing an orange jumpsuit, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because prison clothes change a man, but because the confidence was gone. The posture that used to fill a room, the steady eye contact, the calm smile, all of it stripped away. He looked smaller. When his eyes flicked toward me and then quickly away, something inside me clicked into place. He wasn't powerful. He was exposed. The prosecutor laid out the charges in a voice so matter-of-fact it almost sounded clinical. Multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, credit card fraud, over 20 victims, more than $200,000 stolen. 20. I had thought I was part of a triangle, then part of a cluster. Now I understood the scale. This wasn't personal chaos. It was pattern. And in that moment, something unexpected happened inside me. Relief. Not because of the damage, not because of the money, but because the narrative shifted. For months, I had been asking myself what I missed, what I ignored, what flaw in me allowed this. But sitting there listening to a federal prosecutor describe spreadsheets, P.O. boxes, fake identities in Sacramento before Portland, I saw the truth clearly for the first time. He didn't choose me because I was naive. He chose me because I was stable, employed, organized, good credit, predictable. I wasn't foolish. I was valuable, in the worst possible way. And that realization untangled something toxic in my chest. It wasn't about my judgment. It was about his exploitation. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the sunlight and took a long breath. Marissa stood a few feet away. So did Alyssa. So did two other women I recognized from earlier meetings with the detective. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just stood there in shared understanding. He tried to convince me this was all stress-related, Marissa said quietly. Said he was overwhelmed. Alyssa let out a short, humorless laugh. That's one way to describe felony fraud. We weren't rivals. We were evidence. And in that shared clarity, I felt something solidify inside me. Later that week, Detective Morrison called. They found more digital records, she said. Your testimony will help establish intent and pattern. I hesitated only briefly. I'll testify. The day I took the stand, my hands trembled, but my voice didn't. The defense attorney tried to frame it as emotional confusion. Ms. Talia, isn't it possible Mr. Frederick was simply overwhelmed in his personal life? No, I said evenly. Isn't it true you willingly shared financial information while living together? Yes, because I was engaged to him. The courtroom was quiet. And you never suspected he was committing crimes? No, I said, meeting the attorney's eyes, because I believed I was in a committed relationship, not an investigation. There was a faint murmur from the gallery. For the first time since everything collapsed, I felt steady. Not reactive, not shattered, grounded. After my testimony, I stepped down and caught a glimpse of Frederick watching me. There was something in his expression, confusion maybe, like he couldn't reconcile the woman he manipulated with the one standing upright in front of him. And that was the moment the final thread snapped. I didn't want him back. I didn't want closure from him. I didn't even want revenge. I wanted distance, accountability. and a life that had nothing to do with his orbit. That night, I went home and did something symbolic. I opened my laptop and removed my name from the shared photo storage account he had once created. I deleted every picture that included him, not out of rage, out of reclamation. Then I placed a security freeze on all my credit reports permanently, changed my last lingering shared password, updated beneficiaries on my accounts. I wasn't just healing emotionally, I was fortifying practically. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel heavy. The fear of him showing up, the fear of more secrets, the fear that I had somehow caused this. It had all dulled, because truth, once fully illuminated, removes shadows. Frederick wasn't a tragic widower. He wasn't a confused husband. He wasn't even just a cheating fiancé. He was a man who built systems around deception, and systems collapse under scrutiny. The turning point wasn't about him losing. It was about me understanding. Understanding that being deceived doesn't define me, but how I respond does, and I chose to stand. The sentencing hearing took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, financial records projected on screens, victims describing sleepless nights and drained savings accounts, experts explaining fraud patterns like they were discussing architectural blueprints. Frederick sat at the defense table every day, wearing a suit this time instead of orange, trying to look composed. But the mask never fully returned. The prosecutor laid it out clearly. 5 years of systematic identity theft, more than 20 victims across 2 states, over $200,000 stolen, dating apps used as recruitment pipelines, engagements used as access points. Recruitment pipelines, access points. Those words stripped the last romantic illusion away. The judge didn't rush her decision. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. Mr. Frederick, this was not a single lapse in judgment. This was a sustained pattern of manipulation. You targeted individuals who trusted you and exploited that trust for financial gain. She paused, scanning the courtroom. You used intimacy as a weapon. The sentence hit harder than anything else I'd heard. Intimacy as a weapon. 6 years in prison. Restitution ordered to every identified victim. No early release eligibility until the majority of the sentence was served. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. After the sentencing, I stepped outside into the bright Portland afternoon. The sky looked almost offensively normal. Marissa was there, holding her daughter's small backpack. Sophie wasn't present for the hearing, thankfully. Marissa looked exhausted, but lighter. It's over, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. She nodded once. We filed the divorce last month. It's finalized. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief for her. She had not only lost a husband, she had discovered she'd been living beside a stranger. Alyssa joined us a few minutes later. Restitution might take years, she said, but at least there's accountability. We stood together briefly, a silent acknowledgement of shared damage and shared survival. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread quietly through Frederick's former professional circles. Jake called me one afternoon. Our firm cut all ties permanently, he said. Clients are furious. Some are considering civil suits. Were you involved? I asked carefully. No, he said quickly. We're cooperating fully, but the reputation damage is real. It struck me then. Frederick didn't just lose freedom. He lost credibility. In tech and marketing circles, reputation is currency, and his was bankrupt. I received official confirmation from the credit bureaus 2 months later. The fraudulent accounts had been removed. My credit score began slowly climbing back up. Every time I received a letter stating account cleared due to identity theft, it felt like reclaiming a piece of my name. Emotionally, the aftermath was slower. There were days I felt strong. Other days, a random memory would hit like a bruise pressed unexpectedly. The way he once tucked me into bed when I had the flu. The anniversary dinner he planned down to the candle placement. For a long time, I wrestled with one question. Did he ever feel anything real? I asked Detective Morrison once, during a follow-up call. Do people like him believe their own stories? I asked. She paused thoughtfully. Some do, she said, but belief doesn't erase intent. That was enough. I didn't need to know if his feelings were partially authentic. Intent mattered more. The restitution process began slowly. Small monthly payments from prison wages and asset liquidation. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about acknowledgement. Marissa and I stayed loosely in touch. She enrolled Sophie in counseling. She started working with a financial advisor to rebuild stability. One afternoon, she sent me a message. I don't hate you. I never did. Thank you for telling me the truth. I stared at the screen for a long time. We were 2 women who could have been pitted against each other. Instead, we became witnesses. Alyssa began dating someone new, carefully, slowly. She texted me once. Background checks are my new love language. I laughed harder than I had in months. As for me, I moved apartments again, this time into a larger one-bedroom with hardwood floors and plants I actually remembered to water. I framed a photo of Mount Hood and placed it near the entrance, not as a symbol of overcoming something dramatic, just as proof that life extends beyond crisis. At work, I was promoted to senior project coordinator. My manager told me she admired how I handled personal turbulence without missing deadlines. I didn't tell her that work had been my anchor, that spreadsheets of my own were safer than the ones he built. Friends stopped whispering about the scandal. The story faded from gossip into cautionary tale. Occasionally, someone would ask gently, "How are you really?" And for the first time, I could answer honestly, "I'm okay." Not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt no longer defined the present. Frederick wrote one letter from prison addressed to me. The victim advocate notified me. I declined to receive it. Closure didn't require his handwriting. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was gradual. Reputations dissolving. Legal consequences solidifying. Women rebuilding. And me, stepping further away from a version of myself who once believed love alone guaranteed safety. The world didn't collapse when he went to prison. It adjusted. And in that adjustment, something unexpected emerged. Space. Space for new trust. Space for stronger boundaries. Space for a future not contaminated by hidden accounts and double lives. The destruction he caused didn't define the ending. Accountability did. And that mattered more than revenge ever could. It's been over a year now. Frederick is still in prison. The restitution payments come in small, unremarkable increments. I file them away without emotion. They feel like paperwork, not justice. Justice for me was something quieter. It was the first time I went on a date and didn't feel paranoid. It was the first time I handed someone my phone to look at a photo and didn't feel a flash of fear. It was checking my credit report and seeing nothing but my own name, clean, intact. I don't think about him every day anymore. Sometimes a memory floats up unexpectedly. A restaurant we used to love. A coffee shop that looks like the one where we met. For a second, my chest tightens. Then it loosens. Because I know something now that I didn't know then. Being deceived doesn't mean you're foolish. It means someone decided to lie. There's a difference. For months, I blamed myself for not spotting the signs. The secrecy, the lack of personal history, the too perfect gestures. But I've learned that manipulation works precisely because it mimics sincerity. Frederick didn't fool me because I was weak. He fooled me because he studied how to appear trustworthy. And that realization freed me. I'm more cautious now, yes. I verify stories. I ask follow-up questions. I pay attention when something feels slightly off instead of brushing it aside. But I haven't let this experience harden me. I still believe in love. I just believe in boundaries, too. If someone has very few belongings and an explanation that feels rehearsed, I notice. If someone avoids introducing me to anyone from their life, I notice. If someone's financial story doesn't match their lifestyle, I notice. Not with suspicion, with awareness. That's the difference between paranoia and protection. Marissa is rebuilding her life. Alyssa is in a healthy relationship. I'm building a future that doesn't require secrecy to function. Sometimes I think about the girl who answered that phone call in her office, heart racing, world cracking open. If I could sit beside her now, I'd tell her this. You didn't lose everything. You lost a lie. And losing a lie makes room for something real. Frederick is where he belongs. And I am exactly where I'm meant to be. Free.